Hi folks, this is Jack Spirko with another edition of the Survival Podcast video series. We're also going to put this video on YouTube, just a basic little review of a few popular knives, so there's absolutely no reason for us to limit this just to Members Support Brigade folks. The big thing I want to talk about today with knives, though, is I'm not going to really talk to you about, that perfect knife to have if you're off in the wilderness, lost, and you have to trust your life to nothing more than a knife. The reality is you really don't want to end up in that situation, and the only way you're going to get there and have like the perfect knife for the perfect survival scenario is to be prepared. And if you're prepared, hopefully you're prepared by having more than a knife available to you. I really want to talk to you about everyday usages of knives and how these three knives in particular fit the role. Now, what we have are two very, I would call them mid-priced, very high-quality knives and one extremely cheap knife. Let's start with the cheap knife, because a lot of people think there's no place out there for a cheap knife. This is made by Frost Cutlery. You can buy large batches of them in kind of dealer sets. From late night television, they sell these a lot, and there's a website they have, and I'll try to find that website. I don't remember. It's Cutlery Corner's the name of the show, and if you Google that, you'll probably find their site. But you would think that there's really not much place for a knife that costs $1 or less, and that's about how much these are in quantity. And you can buy very similar knives in stores for $2, $3, $4. It is a good handle. It's a nice rubbery handle. It holds well in the hand. But it's very, very cheap steel. Now, I guess the upshot is you put this on a sharpening steel for about 2 seconds, and it's as sharp as a razor blade. If you try to use it like a heavy tool, it'll break. There's no doubt about that. Now, I've never broke one. What usually ends up happening is little clips on the backside eventually break. But what's the purpose of a knife like this? Well, because they're so inexpensive, you can have a couple in every tackle box, a couple of them in every glove box. You can have them damn near everywhere, which means you're never in a situation where, because you didn't bring your good knife with you, maybe you changed your pants and it was on your belt and you didn't take it off your belt, there's always a knife available wherever you go. I usually keep one of these little cheap knives in my pocket on the inside, tucked in there. It's good for, opening things and stuff like that. So that's not really a survival application, but it is a convenience application, and there's times where that little knife may actually be a lot more valuable than you can imagine. The next knife I want to talk to you about today is a scaled down version of the United States Marine Corps Kabar knife. Scaled down in that the blade is 5 3/4 inches long. It has a nice little serrated edge, which is good for cutting cord or things that may be a little bit difficult to cut with the trailing edge. Now, why a 5 3/4 inch blade? Because many states have a restriction if you're carrying a fixed blade knife for anything other than hunting or fishing, pursuit of game, camping, something like that. You can't carry greater than a 6-inch blade. So instead of going right to the edge with 6 inches, Kabar was smart. They cut the blade at 5 3/4. This is almost a perfectly scaled down version of the traditional Kabar Marine Corps issue knife. I like it and I don't like it at the same time. If you're going to only carry this for hunting and fishing, where you're going to be allowed to carry the full-size knife, get the full-size knife. I promise you it's going to feel better, fit better in the hand. These handles are actually made out of compressed leather. A lot of people think they're wood, but it's leather, and that's good because as it gets wet, it gets sticky, and you won't slip out of your hand. So whether you're a Marine in the trenches fighting with blood on it, or you're gutting a deer, or you're trying to cut some rope with wet hands, in the rain, it's not going to slip out of your hand, so it's good about that. What I don't like about it, and this may be because I have fairly large hands, the handle just seems a little bit too small. It doesn't balance quite right. If I were a Kabar, I would have actually used almost the exact same dimensions of the full-size handle with a reduced blade and maybe brought the width of the blade a little bit more that way. I think it would have been a perfect knife. That said, I do like this knife. I am happy with this knife, and I do use it. And the nice thing is if I want to carry a fixed blade, I can carry it in the state of Texas without violating the knife law. That said, while this is on my side, it will tend to attract attention. It looks somewhat threatening. It may have me questioned in a situation where I wouldn't want to be questioned. Even though it's completely legal, it's fairly large. I like to carry it back here on my side like this so it gets seen. And there's places where you go where it may not be appreciated that you're walking in there with a knife like this. So this is the knife that I carry almost everywhere that I go. Because it's a folding knife, it's a lot less conspicuous. It is probably one of the most famous knives of all time. These were originally made in 1962. I've had this one, I would say, I know I got it before I was in the Army, and I joined the Army in 1989. So I've had this knife that long. So you do the math, it's at least 20 years old, and it's still with me. It's still got a great edge on it. And what I'll tell you about it, even though it's overall a lot shorter than the 110, the blade length is a lot shorter, the handle length is actually a little bit longer, and because of that, this knife actually feels better in the hand. It's a lot more balanced. It's very, very utilitarian. Now, while I would take my my Kabar and I would use it to pound on something that's metallic, I wouldn't do that with the buck because the finish is brass, so it's a softer metal, so it's not quite as utilitarian. But I've used it for tapping things into place. I've not been kind to this knife. I've been tough on it. You can see what the case looks like. You can see that unlike maybe the reviews you've seen of other people on YouTube, the brass is not all shined up. It's kind of worn, but it's a great knife. And I think for day-to-day carry, based on the fact that you got a good full-size feel to the knife, a very high-quality 420 HC steel, holds an edge very good. Go on your belt, doesn't look like much different than, let's say, a Leatherman on your belt. For day-to-day carry, this is probably one of the best overall knives you can carry, because unlike a lot of the tacticals and knives like this that are kind of high visibility, it keeps a low profile, but it's very, very utilitarian. You can work it hard, you can use it hard, and as long as you keep it on that belt, it's always there when you need it. Last thing I'd like to talk about with knives, I see a lot of people on YouTube doing reviews about knives and they want to talk about the factory edge. And with Kabars in particular, nobody's ever happy with the factory edge of the Kabar. And I have to say, they're not that sharp. You buy one of these new, they retail for around 70 bucks. I've seen them in the stores all the time under 50. These are sharp. The Kabar is not so much. You're not even going to cut paper usually. It's kind of a dull edge, I would actually call it. I don't really care about the factory edge of a knife, and I don't think you should either, and here's why. If you're going to take it out and use it, that edge is only going to last so long. Sooner or later, you're going to have to sharpen your knife. So with either of these knives, you want to have a good sharpening stone. I can take this on a butcher steel, like I said, about 3 passes, and it'll be razor sharp. Once one of these are dull, they need to be worked on a good soft stone quite a bit with some oil. The last thing is the Kabar is a carbon steel. It will rust if you don't keep it dry and or a little bit oiled, so know that as well. But both of these are great knives. They're not necessarily the knives that I would strap to my back if I was going to go off into the wilderness for 3 months. But for day-to-day use and for everyday survival, they're more than adequate for the job.